For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future. That is found in Jeremiah 29:11. And although it is comforting to believe in a father that has great plans for his children, the reality is that in the same book, it talks about the devil who plans to cheat, steal, and destroy. In other words, regardless of our own religion and spiritual belief, the world is all about choices, making the right choice, making the wrong choice, somewhere in between. So first, allow me to thank all of you for being here today, for braving traffic and taking time out, especially our birthday celebrant, former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. Thank you, sir. It's such an honor. Of course, our Executive Vice President, Mr. Tom Nagorski, and everyone in the room. Magandang hapon, good afternoon to all of you. Allow me to speak today a little bit about the choices that the Filipino people are making. Also to address not only the elephant in the room, but certain animals in the room. The elephant, the eagle, and the panda. Every first year of a Philippine administration is a time of transition and change. It's partly because we don't have strong party systems. So every administration should build on the gains of the past administration, but should also recognize the weaknesses and strength in order to be able to seek to address these. On the Philippine economy, we are not changing direction. As our economic team led by Secretary Dominguez, one of the best friends from childhood of President Duterte, and as Secretary Pernia and Secretary Diokno have explained and have been doing roadshows, we are strengthening the gains of the Aquino administration. However, we also have to address some problem areas. And what are these problem areas? The first one is not exclusive to the Philippines, but is a worldwide theme, which is inclusiveness. The growth in the Philippine economy the last 5-6 years benefited mostly the 20-30 families who run 90% of the economy. Sure, there were trickle-down benefits and everyone benefited from a better economy. And of course, it has to start that way. We have to build on that. But we still have to be conscious that it wasn't very inclusive, especially geographically. The focus was still on Metro Manila, a small portion where maybe a fifth of the population of the Philippines is during the morning. We have a double morning population from the evening population. The second problem was the sometimes slow and insensitive attitude, from driver's license to issues on traffic and things like that. And third was the not too strong focus on planning, short-term, medium-term, long-term planning, or in cases where plans were laid for us, the Japanese help us a lot with that in planning, decisions were made too slow, and often the problems were much faster or came to us in faster speed than the solutions or decision-making. Thus, the Duterte administration has adopted the theme, build, build, build. Of course, my job is to build, bridge, and build. There's a lot of bridging that has to be done, and I'm sure that there will be questions about that later. The main objective is to turn our economy from a consumption economy into an investment economy. We want to address 4 concerns. I've been in politics for 25 years, from a city councilor to vice mayor, congressman and senator. And I had the privilege of being here once before with Senate President Villar in 2009. And in all the surveys in the last 25 years, 4 common concerns of the business community. First is peace and order. Second is a predictable or stable policy framework. Second is fighting corruption. And fourth is infrastructure, not necessarily in that order. But almost all of the business surveys talks about these 4. Sometimes there's a fifth, the cost of energy or cost of labor. But basically, this 4 is the constant. To do all of this above, to do all of the above, we need peace and stability, both nationally and regionally. So although we want to have an independent foreign policy and we want to be independent, we cannot neglect that we live in a global society and that we are interdependent. So we cannot talk about national issues alone without talking about regional and international issues. The Philippines and this administration, given the short period of time, 6 years or 5 years to go, we also need to focus and we have to find the funding. This is where we start with the elephant when we're talking about focus. The elephant in the room, of course, is human rights and the war on drugs. The massive campaign against illegal drugs and criminality is actually a reaction to a snowballing problem, not only in the Philippines, in Asia, in the world. No less than the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has reported this. Just Google it and you'll see all the articles of how synthetic drugs are invading communities and destroying lives. We refuse to watch and do nothing as the Philippines becomes a narco state and as we lose a whole generation of our children to narcotics. The rule of law was being destroyed by narcotics and not by the war on drugs. The West and the Western media react with the use of the word war. But actually, war is only used for emphasis. That's why the West is very comfortable of using the word war in the war against terrorism. But when it comes on the war on drugs, which is just basically a massive campaign against drugs, the connotation or the mental connection is the gruesome effects of war. But the problem is, ladies and gentlemen, the narco-politicians and the drug lords were the one in the know and the one who had the power. It wasn't the policemen, it wasn't the courts of law. In fact, the police were afraid of going against drug lords or catching people selling narcotics because they would have been suspended or cases would have been filed against them. If not, it would go to the prosecutor's office and some of the prosecutors would flip-flop or make money from these cases, then they would go against the police. Or if it made it to the judges, then again, another problem. And we experienced this personally. My wife is here, Mayor Lani, and in her first year, a high-level target drug lord was caught. And it was in all the papers, and it was in the police blotter. But the drug lord told the police, if you do not release me and let me go in 10 days, you will be removed. And we were all smiling and laughing because we said, this is just probably someone, boasting. 10 days later, he was being relieved. At the time, my sister and I were both senators and my wife was mayor. I called up the general and said, General, why are you relieving this gentleman and what did he do wrong? Sir, we're not relieving him. And he didn't do anything wrong. We're promoting him. So I said, promoting him to what? Sir, we're still discussing that. So I said, General, I wasn't born yesterday. Don't try to fool me. And he said, sir, if only you know the people who are calling me to release that and the level or how high in government they are. And I told the General, it's in the newspapers. It's all recorded. You have 2 senators and the mayor on your side, and all we're asking for you to do is do the right thing. And you cannot even find the strength to do that. But that was how powerful drugs were. And when we call this a drug lord, this was a local drug lord. They weren't even very powerful drug lords. This was seen every day in our newspapers, television, radio. Can you show some of the slides of the 71-year-old raped by alleged drug addict. Mom financed drug addiction by letting dealer rape her child. Next slide. 3 UPLB guards held for drugs, rape of 2 women. 1 woman or child is raped every 53 minutes. 4-month-old baby kidnapped, raped in Karkar City. Next slide. 4 drug addicts rape and kill 8-year-old girl. When a news item like this came out for the first time a few years ago, people were shocked. And people were saying, is he deranged? Does he have a mental problem? How can someone rape an 8-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old? But that is the problem in misunderstanding the drug problem in the US, in the Philippines. Unlike in the US and other parts of the world, where the drug abuse is with regulated substances, marijuana and cocaine, the problem in the Philippines has to do with methamphetamine, hydrochloride, or shabu. In other words, synthetic drugs. And even the WHO and the UN has said that these drugs are associated both with violence and with paranoia. Cocaine and marijuana are not associated with that. So any news items you find about violence when it comes to cocaine and marijuana has to do with the drug dealers fighting it out. But you don't hear of a son shooting his father or a mother selling her daughter to be able to feed their addiction. So this kind of news items were coming out daily, and it was desensitizing society. So if you look at it from that point of view, you would understand why 81, 82% of the Filipino people support President Duterte's rhetoric and action against drugs. It's not because they believe in violating human rights. It's not because we are violating human rights. It's not because we believe in vigilantism, but it's because he is starting to put back the rule of law and just simply stating whatever is right and whatever is wrong is wrong. So, of course, there's a debate whether he goes overboard and whether the rhetoric causes some things, and maybe we can discuss that later. But let me just say that the harsh rhetoric is the language understood by the drug lords. And the problem with the Western media is that the harsh rhetoric they cover. But whenever the president tells the police to follow the law, to not to shoot if they give up, that he will hold them worse, that they will be worse than criminals if they violate human rights, it's never on the media. And that's why in the Human Rights Council in Geneva, we showed the video from his very first public speech in the Philippine Congress, where side by side he talked about fighting drugs, but he also talked about not allowing abuse by the police or by anyone in government and by protecting human rights. Poverty, terrorism, drugs are intimately related, and this was clearly seen in Marawi. As we seek order, we have to seek peace. That is why one of the focuses of the Duterte administration is peace with everybody. Peace with the communist rebels, which is facing a little bit of a difficulty now after a honeymoon period in the first 6 months of his administration. But we're not giving up, and we're hoping that there will be a breakthrough and that both sides will be able to sit down. Peace with our Muslim brothers and sisters in the South who are seeking to redress historical injustices. Things are going well with the MILF and MNLF. A while ago, I was being told about an amazing speech by Senator Benigno Aquino and talked about the Moro Rebellion in the 1980s, you know. And if there is one president that both Christians and Muslims trust in Mindanao, it's President Duterte. So if we do have a chance for peace, it's actually during his term. It's actually now. But peace and stability has also to be felt in the whole region. And this is where the panda comes in. And this is where the panda comes in. Sorry, I mixed up my cards. Okay. So peace and stability in the West Philippine Sea and the South China Sea. Without peace and stability, there is no progress. Without progress, there's no development. Without progress and development, there is chaos. I know to the world leaders who are in this room and those of you who are in government or deals with government, this is easier said than done. And it is very difficult in a complex situation like the South China Sea. And that is where the panda comes in. We have strengthened and not abandoned our claims in the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea. We have changed the strategy and not the objective. We have changed our framework of how to approach the fight for our claims, but we have not changed our stand and we will continue to fight for every square inch that we believe is part of Philippine territory, not only part of sovereignty rights, not only part of UNCLOS, but part of our territory. And maybe if there are questions on that later, but the basic of it all is this. We do not judge or we're not saying that the Aquino administration is wrong. Most probably it was the best thing to do at that time to file the arbitration case. But the arbitration case had three objectives. One, to question the 9-dash line. Two, to clarify the nature of the features, whether they're low tide, high tide features, islands, atolls, etc. And three, to establish the Philippine entitlements. Once we won the arbitration ruling, the challenge is how to implement it. And if we continued the Aquino administration strategy of a shouting match or embarrassing China or trying to reason them in every multilateral, we were winning in world opinion and on paper, but we were losing on the ground. Our fishermen were not allowed to fish. More and more Navy ships. Everyone was building, not only China, but all the other claimants were also building. And since we have less resources, we were left behind in fortifying our position. But by recalibrating and by creating a mechanism with China, the bilateral consultative mechanism, we have put back on track our fight for our claims. Our fishermen are back in the area. We have tentative fishery agreement. We have an agreement for preservation, for marine protection, and I can go to more of that later on. It's an ongoing strategy. So what we're just saying is that we acknowledge the gains of the past administration, but we have to make a decision now on what is in the national interest of the country and how we can have regional peace and stability. Goes to the last point. The last animal in the room is the eagle, the relationship of the U.S. and the Philippines. And maybe I'm a good person to speak about the long-term relationship because my mother is actually from Michigan. Her father is a first-generation German immigrant, and her mother is a second-generation immigrant from United Kingdom. And my dad was supposed to get a law degree, but he also got a marriage degree in Michigan and brought my mom home. And we have a very, very good ambassador now in the Philippines, a U.S. ambassador, Ambassador Sung Kim. And it's funny, when I brought him to the rehab center, which is just behind our house, and we took a picture together, he said, my social media guys says I have to have this picture and have to put it up. Then I said, okay, Ambassador, but make sure you put the names, because they might think, because he's Korean American, he said, they might think you're the Philippine Foreign Secretary and I'm the U.S. Ambassador, you know. And I speak this way because I'd like to emphasize that our long-term relationship, our people-to-people relationship, our long history of shared values cannot be diminished or cannot be affected simply by one administration. And even this administration does not seek to weaken the strong ties between the Americans and the Filipinos. It simply seeks to give us an independent foreign policy where we can stand on our own 2 feet and tell our oldest ally and our oldest friend, with the shared values of Judeo-Christian values, the values for democracy, our almost lust for justice and freedom, it is simply telling our big brother, America, let's stop thinking that our interests and our values are identical. It is overlapping. There are commonalities in our interest, but it is not identical. And this is clearly seen in the East China Sea and the West Philippine Sea. In the East China Sea, before the Obama administration, the U.S. said we do not get involved in territorial claims. But when President Obama visited Japan, he said, if the Senkaku Islands are invaded, the Mutual Defense Treaty is automatically in place, and the U.S. will be with Japan against China. But when it came to the South China Sea, despite the fact that these islands were in, certain of features were in the Treaty of Paris, which gave the Philippines its territory from Spain to the U.S., then from U.S. to our Commonwealth, the U.S. said, we do not get involved in territorial claims. The President asked the first U.S. ambassador he met, if I go hard against China and I claim what is the Philippines, can I expect the U.S. to be behind me? He said, yes, sir. So does that mean you'll fight with us? No, sir. Because Congress has to authorize war. That is what the ambassador said, and that's what the president. And we don't take it against the U.S. Why? Because in the East China Sea, it's a two-way contest or debate, Japan and China. In the West Philippine Sea, or the South China Sea, you have multiple claimants, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Darussalam. So we do not expect the U.S. to take our side and fight Vietnam, Malaysia, China. But we also do not expect, the U.S. should not also should not expect us, to believe that their interest is our interest. Their interest is freedom of navigation, overflight, and of submarine cables, which we share. But the difference between the U.S. and China is that China is saying it's theirs, the U.S. is saying it's international waters. So from our point of view, none of the two is saying it's theirs, it's ours. So while it is true that there's a big difference for China saying it's theirs and the U.S. saying it's international waters, when we are claiming it as part of our territory, it's important for us to know who will also fight for us in that issue and who will not. So anyway, let me end there and just assure you that the long traditional friendship of the U.S. and the Philippines will remain. However, the changes will really try to make us friends to all and enemies to none. And we are starting our navigating these uncharted waters, and forums like this and interactions like this will definitely help us in firming up our friendship and also firming up our foreign policy. So thank you for this opportunity, and sorry for going a little bit over time.